Hello, my name is Zipporah Collier and I will be discussing midwives. So, if you don't know what midwives are, they're basically doctors that practice outside of the hospitals, and it's more of a natural experience between the mother and the child. So, did you know that only 8% of births in the United States are attended by midwives? That's not a lot, right? That's really surprising because I would think it will be normalized to have a midwife since how natural and safe it is, but time will tell. So the midwife industry has been around forever, but it wasn't a official practice until 1925. And that's because they didn't think midwifery was traditional. A lot of doctors, they didn't have like a lot of training to begin with. So imagine bringing your practice outside of a hospital was scary for them. So first I will be discussing the history of midwives, and I'll also be talking about the challenges that have came with midwives in the beginning. So in the United States, most births happens in hospitals. Participants of hospitals births included physicians and many other doctors. It was a challenge to start midwifery in hospitals because it wasn't familiar to physicians across the world. But according to History of Midwifery, Our Bodies Ourselves by Judith P. Rooks and co-authors, it states, medicine did not become professionalized in the U.S. until the last half of the 1800s. When it did, so did the spirit of competition. By the beginning of the 20th century, midwives attended only half of the births in the U.S., and physicians attended the other half. So like I've said previously, it was a competition because traditional doctors wanted to really stick with certain practices, and midwives was outside of their comfort zone, and they would rather stay in their comfort zone because they didn't have much practice to begin with. Next, let's switch gears to the traumatic home birth experience, or the traumatic things that midwives go through. So home births have taken a toll on midwives. It has affected them emotionally and physically. And midwives tend to lose confidence of themselves and their abilities because of the amount of pressure they have. Because essentially they're responsible for many lives, not only the mother and the child, but they're responsible for the spouse feelings, the family feelings, cousins, and what have you. So the article titled Midwives Experience of Traumatic Birth, a systematic review and meta-synthesis by Rubedale Aiden, explains the other effects. The article states traumas experienced by midwives during the birth process may lead to burnout, emotional fatigue, deterioration of interpersonal relations, increase in conflict, dejection, and other similar problems. So that list is really long, and I can imagine that because that's a lot of pressure to do something naturally and for it to work efficiently. That's a lot of pressure. Lastly, we're going to talk about how COVID has affected the midwifery business. So there has been a shortage of midwives across the world. The world is currently experiencing a shortage of 900,000 midwives because of the pandemic. Article, the world is facing a shortage of 900,000 midwives, and the pandemic has only made the problem worse. By Katie Warren, talks about the pandemic effect on home births. She stated, the midwife shortage comes at a time where midwives across the U.S. have reported seeking a spike in demand for out-of-hospital births during the pandemic. Kaya Hubbard recently wrote for the U.S. News, there is a fear about going into an acute care facility where COVID patients are also being treated. So there's a lot of fear going on surrounding the pandemic because it's a virus that spread fairly quickly. And so mothers and the spouses' families and stuff like that are scared because it's a new experience, especially for first-time mothers experiencing a baby in a pandemic with all like the germs and that and what that can bring. So I can imagine that being terrifying. So lastly, I just want to conclude that midwife is a practice that's been around for centuries. It has promoted a safe and intimate home deliveries, but it wasn't always like that. In the early 1900s, earlier I told you that they had challenges with the midwife industry because they would rather focus on traditional practices. But now midwives has been around for years, and it's an industry that's gonna keep on going, and COVID might put a stop to it for now, but when the virus is over, hopefully the midwife business will be back in business. Thank you.